Serious, do you personally know a murderer? What were they like? How did they kill someone? A friend of mine stabbed his father when he was 16 years old with kitchen knife. His father was a drug dealer, had many issues with police, and was beating the crap of him and his mother. One day it was simply too much. It was like 15 years ago. My friend now has a normal family, is a cheerful guy, and you wouldn't ever tell he has done something like this. Friend went on one date with a guy. I talked to him for a while. Seemed like a decent guy. Bit of a braggart but not terrible. About a year later he killed his girlfriend, stabbed her in the face and head 20+ times. Met one a while back at a gas station on my way to Gainesville. Was pumping gas and a guy came up and just started chatting about how beautiful a day it was. He apologized and just said he was in such a great mood he had to share it with someone. He told me he had just gotten out of jail that morning, where he spent 8 years for killing the man that raped his 13-year-old daughter. He was on his way to go see her. We chatted for a few minutes, and he had a poetic-like monologue about not taking your life, freedom, and loved ones for granted. He started crying. I gave him a hug and wished him the best of luck. Shout out to Octavius, I won't ever forget you. I worked with someone that killed someone in self-defense. I didn't believe his story, which is probably why he served time for the incident. The story he told was that he was having sex with some girl and her husband came home and found them and immediately attacked him. He said he didn't want to fight him, but killed him in self-defense. Some months after we hired him, we got word that he also had some child molestation in his criminal record. Once that word spread around, he disappeared. He had stolen some stuff from coworkers before he left. 2 weeks later he was robbed and killed outside a bar near work. My wife recently received a call from one of her family members that shocked her. Her uncle was arrested in Michigan for a murder that happened like 20 years ago. Apparently, a drug deal went bad, and he had killed this woman and then fled the state. For the next 20 years, he was completely normal, despite being investigated and questioned on 2 separate occasions, both of which he was able to keep hidden from the family. He recently returned to Michigan and was arrested due to DNA linking him to the murder and is now on a $1 million bond. The whole family was shocked as they never knew. I was friends with a girl whose dad ended up being discovered as a serial killer. I never discussed it with her, but she's very defensive over it from what I've heard. The daughter of the BTK killer has a memoir out. She says that 95% of the time he was a great dad, and that she didn't believe it when he was arrested. He had already killed 4 people by the time she was born. BTK and Ted Bundy are 2 very interesting cases. BTK basically stopped once he became too busy with his children, and then restarted once his kids grew up. Seems like boredom was his worst enemy. Then you have Ted Bundy, who was intelligent but cold and focused that energy into anything constructive outside of murdering people. Normal family. Dad, mum and 3 children. They lived in front of the house where we moved to when I was around 11. Everything was normal. We weren't the closest neighbors, just an always greet them with a smile kind of relationship. When I was around 16 he killed his wife with a knife in his house in front of his children. They were kids. I think their brains made up a story about a monster when they were in court. They still love his dad, visited him in jail, and moved back with him after he was released years after. My grandpa's friend had a wife that was cheating on him. The husband didn't really care until he found out that she was leaving him. When the wife came home, the husband killed her, chopped her body up, and tried to burn the body. Police were called because the guy the wife was cheating on called them cause he was worried about her not coming back to him at a certain time. When the police came to the house they could see smoke in the back and caught the husband burning the body. My grandpa visits the husband every now and then in jail. My girlfriend's old boss killed his wife by spiking her drink with cyanide he took from his lab, then tried to quickly get her cremated to avoid scrutiny over the cause of death. Needless to say that didn't work, and he's in prison for life. It was a pretty big story when it happened, since they were both relatively prominent doctors. I went to high school with and was pretty good friends with a guy that joined the Air Force. After a 4th of July cookout where he tried to kiss some other guy's wife and got rejected, he later showed up at their place on the base and stabbed them both to death. He attempted to kill a third guy that witnessed it, but that person survived. The guy I knew was given the death penalty for the murders and is still on death row. The whole thing really shocked me, as he was always extremely friendly at school. Never would have pictured him doing something like that. I used to work with a dude that murdered his wife while his kids were in the house, in a different room, because she cheated on him. Turns out, he didn't want everybody to label him a murderer for the rest of his life, so he killed himself too. I didn't go, but from what I was told, everybody at their double funeral claimed they were there for her, not him. I know too, allegedly. There was a couple who used to come to open board game night at our FLGS. They seemed to be okay people. He was a veteran, and they had adopted a special needs kid when he was like 12 or 13. So they seemed like decent people. Something I felt was always off about her though. Their adopted kid was deaf, and they never let him interact with anyone, and she pretended to know sign language when it was clear she was faking it. I always felt something was off about her. Fast forward 8 months and we hear their trailer burned down, and their adopted kid didn't make it out being special needs and deaf. There was nothing to warn him. Turns out like a month later they killed him, either on accident or on purpose, and set the trailer on fire to try and cover it up. One's in jail, the other's on out bail, but will be back in jail soon I hope. Trust your instincts on people I guess. My first cousin killed my ex-girlfriend and her brother. Drug and related crime. It's really awkward when I occasionally bump into her family members. Our neighbor was an amazing family friend. I thought she was my grandma until I was about 10. When I was about 3, her brother killed their mom. I don't know how, just that it happened. One of my earliest memories is helping clean out her house. He was schizophrenic and thought she was going to kill him. He went to a mental institution, got properly medicated, and our friend kept close to him. She has a twin sister who reacted differently than her, so I didn't actually know of the twin sister's existence until I was about 15. When our friend passed away, my mom started talking to the brother more often. Our friend asked her to make sure he was taken care of, and we were her family, as she fell out of touch with her family after the incident. He's actually very sweet. Acts a bit like a child, but in a sweet way. He loves animals. Our friend talked about my sister and I a lot with him, because we work with animals, so he loves hearing about that. He's very polite. He sometimes asks for very small things and thanks my mom a million times for whatever it is. I'm a criminal defense attorney, so yes, a tiny percentage are spousal abusers who escalated in violence over the years. A tiny percentage have antisocial personality disorder. A tiny percentage have extreme mental illness. Most are about drugs or money, or both. My old roommate in the army murdered someone over drugs this past summer. Honestly, it wasn't very surprising. He was a roided up ducking nutbag. Sometimes being all you can be entails sharing a bunk bed with crazy McMurders folks. When I was a kid in Mexico, my sister was best friends with this girl. She was a really sweet girl. Kind, funny, awesome. She had a bright future. We moved away and later it was discovered that her dad and older brothers were criminals. Her dad was arrested and is in jail at the moment. He was charged with kidnapping and God knows what else. Her brothers weren't arrested. The local community didn't like the fact that she was related to a kidnapper, especially because a lot of kids go missing in Mexico City, and they began to harass her. She was a teenager. She didn't know anything. Her brothers got pissed and shot some guys that were harassing her and got sent to jail themselves. I don't know what happened to her mom. I know my sister's friend is going through a lot of shit at the moment. She began to drink and do drugs. She never really recovered from what happened. I seriously hope she someday does. She was a good person. Her brothers were awesome. I was just a kid when I met them. I hung out a lot at their place. Their dad was cool and quiet. Her mom babysat me sometimes and helped out when my dog was pregnant. Her brothers were awesome. Mind you, I was about 8 at the time and little kids aren't known for being objective. They all seemed like a good family. I had no idea what they were really like. My two second cousins, brothers, are in prison now. 29 years ago they killed a friend of theirs, a girl. They raped her and killed her. She was very beautiful. They got away with it for 26 years until last year they exhumed the body and found new evidence. They both maintain that they are innocent. I'm a nurse and a patient I looked after in the ICU was an elderly gentleman who'd given his terminally ill wife a fatal overdose and then tried to take his own life the same way. She died. He made a full recovery and was arrested once he was fit for discharge. I've never experienced anything so upsetting in my life. Disguising details to preserve confidentiality. I had a client once who had spent more than 20 years in a psych hospital. I could see from records she had killed her husband. She was really quite pleasant. Very supportive family, including her adult children and grandchildren. One day she told me why. She was diagnosed with one of the big mental illnesses. She discovered her husband molesting their children. He said he would just tell everyone she was delusional, so she would be hospitalized. No one would believe her, and he would do whatever he wanted. So she killed him. Kids went to a good, stable home with people who could raise them safely. She went to a forensic hospitalization for decades. Seemed like a great plan to me that worked out well. I believed her due to the nature of the family involvement. It was kind of none of my business in relation to my work besides of course monitoring some safety concerns. She didn't ever seem dangerous to me and there was no record of any other violent incidents. People who are institutionalized for a long time always show it, in my experience, so there were ways in which she was off. And she still had the illness, of course. So who knows? She could have slaughtered a perfectly innocent man. Still seemed quite nice to me. I used to work with a guy who was a gangbanger. He was a nice family man when I met him after he did his time and moved across the country. October 18th 1994 my mom killed my stepdad. Also the day my daughter was born. Also the day my niece was born. Many years of abuse by my dad and two other stepdads. Alcohol and money was main factor. My mom did 6 years in prison. Went to school with a girl that shot and killed her father. Guy had been molesting her and her older sisters for years and she finally got fed up. He got frisky with her one morning, so she shot and killed him. She was 15 at the time. No charges were pressed and she actually stayed with us for a few days after she left custody to escape the press. Mom was one of her teachers in school and always said she was a great kid. Hopefully she's able to put the trauma out of her head and move on with life. My cousin, when we were in our early teens he moved out of state. He was always a little antisocial, but moving away took away the friends that he did have. Story goes that his best friend from back home came to visit for a week. He was 19 at the time. Things soured for the trip when he told her he had feelings for her and she did not. This happened in the middle of the week and they still had a couple more days before she left. One of the days he planned some sort of camping trip or hike. He took his dad's pistol with him and during the trip shot her in the head. They both went missing for a couple days and no one knew what happened until they found him a couple states over with her body in his trunk. I remember him going missing very well because a day before he had texted me, which I found weird because he was always closer with my sister than with me. He was asking me what sort of books I was reading and if I had any recommendations. 2 years late, while in jail he hung himself on the day he killed her. My uncle is in jail for killing his mother-in-law. It happened when I was very young, so it took a while for me to find out all the details as they were obviously hidden from me. From what I understand it was done in panic as the police were outside at the time, and he was on drugs. I don't have many memories of him. He called my cousin while we were in school once and asked to speak to me, which my mum didn't like when she found out. He's my dad's brother. The only time I've seen him since was at my granddad's funeral, sat handcuffed between two police officers with his head in his hands crying. I didn't consider this person a friend or anything, but I've hung out and smoked with Maxim Gellman 3 to 4 times. When we needed weed one time, my friend's older brother got him to come and give us weed, and he ended up smoking with us a few times whenever he came. For anyone that wants to know, Wikipedia or Wiki Maxim Gellman stabbing spree, he seemed like nothing was wrong with him. Pretty crazy. My supervisor from one of my first jobs, lifeguard, killed a kid who was in her daycare. It was partly negligence, but it also came out that she was overly harsh with the kids who were in her care and also waited to call for help after the incident. I never would have called her a psychopath or anything like that when I worked for her, but she did seem a little off, like she would gaze off intensely and tell jokes that didn't land. Basically she seemed a little too gritty to be working with a bunch of teenagers. I was very surprised when she switched to doing daycare. There have been some scary videos from nannycams showing babysitters and East daycare workers abusing kids, including infants. It's crazy. One vid was of a tutor abusing a young boy with disabilities. The kid's parents were home. The tutor was just doing therapy in the basement with the kid. Luckily they had a camera down there. It's hard to understand how someone who chooses that profession could so blatantly mistreat the people they've basically dedicated their professional careers to helping. I dated a guy who killed a man who raped my ex's sister. She had Down syndrome and the man brutally raped and beat her. So my ex beat him to death. His lawyer was able to get him very reduced time, since the court saw it as defense of a defenseless person. I never held it against my ex, although I think the guy should have rotted in jail instead of dying. I'm honestly very glad he stood up for his sister, even though it ended badly.